I don't think the descendants of the oppressed get to be told by the descendants of oppressors when to quit. That's a process that the oppressed, the victim, whatever you want to call that person, has to go through and figure out. So I wrote that novel to a huge extent in response to all of that. Not just because I think slavery is something that we're still talking about. It's the great undiscussed, over-discussed issue. And the extensions of racism, of slavery, the racism which we have in this country. In this country we have a way of saying it's not about race, it's class. And if it's class, then man, we're having the most ridiculous series of coincidences I've ever seen in my life. It is race. And there are parts of our legacy that we still need to confront. And we also should not have people coming into our backyards telling us what we should and should not get over. But I won't go into that. Already in enough trouble in England. And also, if in a very real way, the legacy of slavery is still with us. And in case you haven't noticed it, slavery is still going on. And then we come to this monster, this novel that was supposed to be my shortest novel, that ends up being my longest. And a huge part of it was me trying to make sense of the 70s, the one my parents experienced. My 70s was chopper bags, Nutty Buddy ice cream, and which Charlie's Angel I liked the best. And a Starsky and Hutch t-shirt that I wore for 4 years. That was what my 70s was. So growing up, and I realized just how close and how on the brink we were so many times. The battles which I didn't think we were fighting, the things that we're still fighting for. The 70s my parents and grandparents went through. So you can be in the middle of something and you're the one person who doesn't know what's going on. And as a child of the 70s, I realized that was sort of my case. So a lot of what I wrote in this novel was a fact-finding mission. Even though I grew up in the 70s, this was a novel I researched the most. This is the one where I could probably write a history book about it the most. I talk about writing down history. And I've been called a historical novelist. I don't necessarily reject the term, although I think if 1970s is history, you're calling me old. But I am interested in history because unlike it's the present tense that's fixed, it's the past that keeps changing. Why does it keep changing? Because of who writes the histories. I still remember the first time I wrote Making the West Indies, read Making the West Indies. I had no idea. Because the very first thing I ever learned in school was Christopher Columbus discovered Jamaica in 1494. It was funny because I won this award from the Before Columbus Foundation, and that's the first thing that came out of my mouth. It was awkward. But I wanted to know, I still think that in a lot of ways, the 70s, even more so than the 60s, and more so than the 80s, sort of shaped the Jamaica that we're in now. And I don't necessarily mean bad. What people sometimes forget is that popular culture, especially culture from the street coming up, exploded in 1976. That the blueprint for writers like myself came out of the 70s. The idea that the way we talk now can be in a novel. I mean, most of my novels are range from between 50 to 100% pato. And funny enough, it's usually Jamaicans that have the problem with it. Because of the sort of shame responses. But that was what led me to write this novel and led me to explore this time. And it's not coincidence, when I was talking about lack of coincidences, it's not coincidence that as soon as second Marley, who's called the singer in the novel, entered the novel gained focus. Because in terms of breaking down Jamaican society, the only other person who probably came close was Garvey. In terms of nailing the hypocrisies and contradictions of our society, you could read, there are lots of books you could read. You can also just listen to We and Them. that a lot of this sort of empowerment that artists like myself have, not just to write books, but to dare to believe that you can read that a book that's, you know, talking about all sorts of raw chop patois. Everything from, you know, from who come from Havendale and Duane Park, you know, to Waterhouse and a certain nightclub that should not be mentioned live on here, could be the source of serious literature. So to him and we and the writers of my generation after owe a very great deal, and we're still paying that debt. And that to me was the main reason, and that to me is what drove this novel. How, you know, the good, the bad, and the consequences we're still going through, how we're still making sense of it now, how we can look at the past to sort of guide us to the future, and how this man, this singer from 9 Miles, this guy who nobody thought would break it big, became, even without knowing it, the political, the social, and the cultural center of all of it. There's a video on YouTube of a band called First Rays of the New Rising Sun, and there are 3 girls from Afghanistan. And if you know anything about Afghanistan and the Taliban, and anything about that, you know the fact that 3 girls are picking up guitars is enough to have them killed. And they sing the most gentle, ethereal music you've ever heard. And it's 3 girls completely aware of the stakes, completely owning up to their fear, knowing every single note they make they could be killed for. And who's in the background? Bob Marley. I didn't necessarily have to end that sentence, but I'll say that for me in particular, he's been a big light in my work and continues to be a big light in my work. And I think that in many ways, we as Jamaicans are even still coming to terms of the greatness this man has accomplished. And I hope this book helps in some way towards that. So, thank you for coming.